The Cone of Glass and Fire. Chapter 16. Tragedy for Harry. The next morning, Harry got up and put on his tatty work clothes, finding comfort in the familiar actions, although it was also much more difficult than he had anticipated. He had to stop for a moment, his hand on the foot of the bed, a slight faint feeling coming over. He was alarmed, but it dissipated quickly. He felt clarity and determination coming through, relieving his unease. He had got up for the first time the day before, and the elation he had felt as an active, growing lad was incalculable. By that time he had become restless beyond belief to rid himself of his confinement in the upper story, with its dim light from the small window. Yet now, on hearing Jane's call so early in the morning as he lit his candle and got dressed under his cover, the chill December dark bit into him before his early shift. He was caught by the surprise of this near icy cold and wanted to crawl back into bed immediately. The warm patched cover they had quickly made looked so cosy. He smelt toast and tea. Oh yes, well, he was ready for that. And it was a decision changer. Instead of back under the covers, he quickly made his way down into the warmer, lighter downstairs with the fire. Jane was there as usual, but "You still look pale to me," she worried. "Well, a few minutes in the cone'll change that." "Aye, that's what I'm afraid of." The rest of breakfast was fairly quiet, the usual morning talk. They both enjoyed this, a time just for them, the banter over the teapot while she toasted with the long fork. Today she had some eggs boiling in the kettle as soon as she had heard him moving to come down. Harry was so grateful for this extravagance, having learned that Uncle Will had supplied them from the farm. Thank God for family, thought Harry, tucking in, making sure in his mind to thank his substantial uncle the next time he saw him. God, they owed them. He must remember, they owed them. Did he want porridge? "Do I?" he joked, the code for "of course I do." This was followed by a quick chat about how they would get a bed to the house that weekend. The farm cart apparently was bringing a load of flour into Stourbridge and could help them perhaps. On being asked about the bed, her eyes became cross and flashing as she liked a bargain. "We've picked one. Seems fairly decent, though he made us pay more." "Where's that coming from then?" He looked up at the mantel for the clock and reassuringly saw it was still there. Good, but it still didn't answer the question. "Have we borrowed money from the farm?" He glanced at Jane, but she was busying herself, pretending she hadn't heard him, avoiding his look, and said no more. Right then he had no time to pursue it any further, but his suspicions meant all the more reason why he should be back at work. She wished him off at the doorstep, her face worried, furrowed. "Don't you dare wash under that freezing cold pump I'll do for you myself if you do." He told her not to worry and trudged in his weighty boots off to work. They seemed much more weighty this morning. joining the steady stream of similarly clad men, he began once more to feel reassured. Bill, on seeing him as all struggled in and out of the coat-hanging shed, looked at him concerned. I don't think you're right, my lad. We can get our Jamie over for a couple more days. I can't, Bill. My mum needs the money. We must be more than broke by the time I've had off already. Don't you worry about that. There's those who... And he paused, not knowing what to say, it seemed, before he continued. There's those who, well... a cough. Care, perhaps. Don't you worry. But Harry, his pride swelling up inside, could and would not hear anything of it. Once in, he did feel better, expectant and hot in a way he had actually missed for a while. It was almost as if the sweat flowing out of him from all over was cleansing, purifying, although he leaned against the wall just a little to make sure he was steady. The time went by. He felt all right, settled. Then he saw Bill's nod. Time to mop his gaffer's face and get him his first drink. He was managing. Although now he was moving, the furnace seemed to be in his blood, in his veins, all over. Harry looked at the morning's work. He should get that over to the tunnel. He thought, mop down Bill, then shift this lot, otherwise it'll be piling up by the time he got back with the beer, and that would slow them down. He mopped his gaffer, who worked away smart and swift, although he did look at Harry for a second. The work was waiting, and the intense yet half light as close to the furnace as Bill sat in his special gaffer's chair made it difficult to make anyone out properly. So Bill carried on, saying nothing, but as watchful of them all as he could be, the shepherd of his small flock. Harry picked up a tray and loaded, using the edge of the gaffer's shelves to balance, while one of his hands now carefully collected with a wet cloth the very large fiery bowl Bill had just put down. It was taking up the most space and clearly needed moving. He stood up full and started to walk it over, but the heat on the tray now increased the feeling of fire near his own chest and face, with the fiery bowl so close there. It was fierce, unexpected. He'd forgotten about this, and all the while his blood and veins increasingly seemed to burn. It was then his head started to swim. Quickly, so quickly, and all at once he felt his eyes roll up into their sockets, deep and unseeing, his heart pounding hot into his ears, a deep, unfathomable, rushing sensation. Ridiculously, he panicked with the ball of fire on the tray and put his hand up to it as he felt it tipping. He had to stop it falling, he thought. His eyes saw once more for a moment and watched as his hand touched the glowing fire rim, the edge of the bowl itself moving over the sloping tray, and he was gone. He woke in bed, and at first it did not come to mind that he had been at work at all. He couldn't remember anything that had happened, except he knew he'd been ill. He'd been having dreams. Jane crying and wailing. Jamie comforting his mother, tense and crying. A terrible, burning pain somewhere down his side and his hand quickly took him over in just a few seconds. Now! Burning it was. Now! In his left hip and thigh and his hand. Now! Ah! Oh! I could think of nothing from then on. Nothing else. My God! My God! He said without restraint. How it hurt. He'd never felt such pain. Agony, my God. He was so sorry to have woken. He wanted to go back to sleep, desperate to fall back into deep, dreaming unconsciousness. But the pain... it was so great. Sleep would be no more than impossible. My God, he gasped or tried to, though he heard no sound. The pain, it was taking him over his whole being, and then slowly and cruelly, along with the pain, a sinking feeling he could not escape from, as terrible as the red-hot agony, a most awful sensation, cold and cruel in his still hot head, a deep shivering cold, and the deadening dread of recollection, most terrible and unyielding, like sinking down into a pit he would never come out from. The dread, his memory returning. No, that's it. I'm out. He cried out without knowing, loud and desperate, trying to rise. He knew everything had depended on his own ability to work in the cone, and he would never have that chance again. Chapter 17. The time after. Jane, her eyes red-rimmed from watching, called out loud, Sal, bring the medicine. Quick, love, he's awake. Then she was there, holding him on his right, candles on low in the upstairs. His mum ran in, a cup with a cloth over it. Her eyes more tired and desperate, just as tired and desperate as Jane's. She trembled. In fact, they both did. But the practical nurse of Jane now took over. She was on the side away from the agony and said, Here, my love, here, drink this. Oh, my boy, the pharmacist and I made it for your pain. Go on, all of it. All of it. That's it now. And she slowly tipped the cup to help him. You'll be all right now. Fever's going. Your fever's going. It's all right now. She held him gently like he was a baby, and he struggled for a memory that was there, submerged like he was. It was something deep in, some memory he couldn't get hold of, with her holding him there at her breast, head struggling halfway between consciousness and losing himself again in the depths. Mum came to the right side of the bed now, where she could hold his hand. He didn't know whether time had passed. She took the sweat from his face with a cool rag and kissed him. The pain was beginning to ebb, but still very much there. He wept. My God, Jane! Mum! Ah! I cried loud, strangled through clenched teeth. What is it? Pain? They asked. Ah! 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 Was all he could answer. You burnt darling," Jane cried back. Both women looked as though they had neither slept nor eaten. Thinner and pale, sweat on their own brows, he fought, wanting to talk to them, but his eyes closed. The pain was starting to go, and so did he. The next few weeks were the same. The drugged, desperate sleep of Jane and the pharmacist's drafts in between the tormented bouts of waking agony. His pain was too intense, too immense, so dreadful too dreadful to care about what he said, what had happened, how long ago, what was going to happen in the future. He wanted to die. Only an immediate screaming pain filled his mind each time he surfaced. The drugged sleep of dreams he didn't want to have, then the pain again. Now! Not the pain! No, not again! Not again! But there it was. Then horrible, dreadful sleep that was not, but just kept him under. I can't take this day anymore, he thought. What a long, most awful day it is. It went on, it went on, it went on, it went on. Burning hot and cold agony. Nothing could touch him. No sleeves, no clothes, no bedclothes, no bandages, no other dressings. Sleeping in a well, in a pit, in the furnace, in the cone, glass stuck to him, into him, molten, melting him, fusing onto him. It was the agony. It was his own hell. The day, or the month, or the moment of his searing seemed to go on and on and on. Finally, it started to change. Not exactly to leave him, but not to be quite so deep and unrelenting. Jane, like a mother to him, was there all the time now. He struggled to remember who she was. Who was she? Who? It was forgotten. It had been forgotten too long ago. He couldn't remember. She was someone to him, a word he couldn't remember to call her. And this day was going on forever. Winter was well underway. He'd been brought downstairs to keep warm. Agonising but necessary. He shivered still uncontrollably. Mum, Jane, mother, Aunt Jane, mum, all one word, there talking. Was this another fever? A doctor. There was no temperature now, the doctor thought not. The wound was clean, he said. People with burns sometimes shivered as they got better. He wasn't sure why, but they did. It was good. It meant they were healing, but they had to keep the area clean and things away from it. Christmas long past and many prayers were offered, Jamie's included, in thanks for the faint beginnings of Harry's recovery. Bill and Mrs. Bill had sent home a box of pencils, including coloured ones and a lovely pad of paper. Many messages, too, came from Sterling's. They were missing him very much, etc. Harry wasn't sure what to make of these, when eventually he was well enough to take them in. was it meaning for when he came back to a different department? At this stage he hadn't got the courage to ask, and hardly had the heart to draw when he felt up to it. Right now he hardly cared at all, as the pain still returned every day. Except he knew he should ask about the future, and be thankful he had been so lucky for his wounds not to go bad. People died very quickly when that happened, everyone knew. Finally, in February, his hand began healing properly, and a thin new cover began to creep over lesser parts of his weeping sores, though still so tender. Nothing could touch them without making him cry out immediately, his face screwed into perfect agony. By late March, he could gingerly move about the house. Enough skin, just. Very thin now, covering his hip. Till that point, Harry had tried to put it out of his mind about Sterling's. But now he could not help but start thinking. What was going to happen? Was he being put somewhere else? What? It was a Sunday, and everyone else was at church. Jamie was slightly selective in his church attendance, as he had a long, long way over to Dudley for him to walk. The Stourbridge Catholic Chapel, which was a glorified hut really, wasn't big enough to take everyone who wanted to worship. He stayed home this week, looking out for Harry, who up till then had been asleep. Harry had got to the state where he was dreaming about and thinking about little else apart from what was going to happen to him. He couldn't bear it any longer. Jamie? Yes, Harry. Jamie? Then he managed to ask. He felt as if he was going to cry, but he did manage just. What's going to happen to me? Well, you're getting better properly, and then you're coming back, Harry. He tried to keep his friend's heavily drugged attention. If you want, Harry, I mean. I thought you knew. No. His voice perplexed and surprised like a child's. I thought they wrote you. No. I'm coming back where? Oh, Lord help me. Even Jamie's patient nature was being tried. For about the 10th time. Where you want to, Bill said. He said it wasn't your fault. Said the tray gave way responsibility of Sterling's. Oh, Harry had got that this time. And I told you. Don't you remember? No, he whispered. Yes, Harry. Clary signed your form and everything else. Your mum got £10 for you, and more if something bad happened. Oh, gently. You mean if I died? He said, his eyes large and not fixing on Jamie properly. Yes, but you're not
going to die, Harry."
Then his patience tried.
"Oh, Lord knows. Look at me. You wanted to, and I don't blame you. Oh, no, I don't blame you one bit. It sounded like living hell. But you're not going to die. You're not going to die, Harry."
He saw Harry's attention starting to wander once more.
"Look at me."
And he held Harry's head straight, gently, quietly.
"You're getting better. Look at me, Harry. Look in my eyes. That's it, man."
He carried on now, seeing Harry's eyes on him.
"Glass burns, listen now. Sometimes they heal clean, Harry. The doctor said. Clean, but very painful. Oh my. So Lord knows you don't feel so, but Harry, you've been a lucky devil. A real lucky bastard, in fact. Though between you and me it looked and sounded like it'd been absolute hell. Absolute bloody hell. And I don't think you'll be doing any more going back to work too soon."
He gave Harry a wink.
"It's hot in there. Too dangerous."
Harry laughed weakly, but he got the joke. He got the joke, he thought. His head wavering slightly, he answered the Irishman. "The tray didn't give way, Jamie."
"Well, thank you for your confession, but we all know that."
Jamie laughed.
"Bill, he's the man. He pulled a few strings with Clary, and no one would see. No one would gainsay the word anyway. It might be them next time, or their son. That's how they think about it. And Mr. Smith, well, he started in the corn. He knew damn well what was going on, but he said nothing. He said nothing when he signed your forms. He's a good man."
Later, when he was lucid again for a short time, he asked, "Who's been working with Bill?"
"Oh, a little lad named Jack, but only 9. Lovely lad, but Bill misses you. He's always saying."
"What's going to happen to Jack then?"
"Well, he's going in a new place with my team. Looks like Bill's broken him in for us. He's an Irish lad, and I'll make him work a bit harder. I know what you say to an Irish laddie."
"Oh, I bet you do." Harry's weak smile making Jamie's heart so glad. He hadn't seen anything happy about his friend for months. And finally, he managed for his mind to retain the important parts of that conversation. Fortunate for himself and for Jamie's own mental health, as Jamie had that same conversation many times already. It was from then on his appetite began to come back, and quickly. He began to turn from a real mop-headed scarecrow, as Jane with love called him, into someone a little more resembling his former self. It was late March, and Harry was hoping to get back to work sometime at the end of the month. He spoke to Jane about this.
"It's all right. You don't need to worry. There's people who care about you," she said, a little awkward.
Harry was drawing a picture for her, a meadow from the viewpoint of a person sitting, the grasses, flowers and buzzers delicately coloured with pencils from the wooden box Bill and Mrs. Bill had given him at Christmas. He hadn't been able to even look at the present until his conversation with Jamie, but since then drawing had slowly but surely begun to take up more of his time. He'd even drawn a coloured picture of inside the cone. The beautiful fires in the pots had fascinated the women of the house, who had never, or would never, see inside. He thought about Jane's last comment, and he looked at the pencils and the box. "Bill said the same thing to me once,"
What's that? You don't need to worry. There's people who care about you. He looked at her oddly. Well, maybe you're lucky, Harry. Maybe you're just one of those fellas who people care about. She looked a little sheepish. Did Bill give you money? Did Bill give you and Mum money while I was ill? What makes you say that? Well, I told you he said the same thing about caring once, and you couldn't have had enough money even with the £10 from Sterling's for all this time I've been ill, and the doctor and everything. Well, they took up a collection, as usual, when there's an accident. Everyone gives, from all over Stourbridge, all the glassworkers and the Friendly Society. How much did we get? Oh, listen to you, she said, and hit him on the side of the face with the tea towel she always seemed to hold. Conversation was therefore at a close, he knew, and he was tired, too tired to talk any more himself. And if she didn't want him to know, Jane would weave it around him far too fast for him to keep up. He didn't have enough energy to push it. Chapter 18. Recovery. His skin on his left hand looked decidedly odd and tight where he had been burned, not like the rest of his skin. Oh, it made him wince when he stretched it. His hip was even worse. It definitely made him flinch. He felt his face involuntarily contort when he moved, and the skin round the burn was still very red and inflamed. He often still had a strange agony underneath. Unfortunately, quite a bit of skin had also pulled away when changing a dressing at one point, after it had first started to grow back, and now it had to make up for the growth lost. He was just able to wear loose trousers with a cotton dressing rather than a nightgown, as it had mostly stopped weeping, but it was still tender as hell sometimes. Though when he thought back to the absolute burn of agony that he'd still remembered and always would, it was nothing. But he didn't want to think back to that, though he would get flashes of it in his mind. Awful. Awful. He wanted to be better so much. He was getting so bored, but he knew he wasn't well yet. He talked with Jamie, who thought for a minute and suggested going to see Bill. Harry had to be honest. Right now, I don't think my hip is up to it yet. It's very sore and I don't want to make it worse again. Let's have a look. Jamie winced himself. Oh, Lord. I'm seeing the raw, partly scabbed over, partly red, inflamed and tight new skin. Just at the thought of the pain it must be giving Harry, he made the ow face, then shook his head. No, you can't go all the way there yet. Though it was only a short distance, really. Jamie carried on. Ask Bill and Mrs. Bill to tea. Mum would say a Saturday. But would he come, do you think? I'm sure he would. I'm sure the whole Gaskell clan would come if you asked them. There were several Gaskell cousins working around Stourbridge in the glass industry, plus their wives sometimes. My God, he said, I don't think I could take that. Oh, it can wait for marching day to catch up on everyone.
But still, at Harry's request, the Bills were invited, and Jane was very excited about it. More excited than they would have expected. It was treated as a real occasion, like Christmas, and she was very proud of Harry that it was he who had made the request. Mum was more quiet. He wondered whether it was perhaps because they had accepted money from Bill during his recuperation, as the doctor called it. He was almost sure they had borrowed money from him, either that or from the farm, which somehow he would have felt even worse about. He tried to talk to her, but she just would beat him away verbally, saying things like, "Oh, don't worry," and "There's really nothing to worry about, just get well, and that's what you need," or "You're doing too much thinking here at home, everything's fine." Perhaps she was right, but still, Mr. Sterling had given him enough reckoning to realise that, what with the doctor's visits and the medicine, which he was strangely beginning to like now, as well as keeping the house and having afforded a new bed, which he also couldn't work out how they had done, plus the fact that Mum had not worked as many hours since the first weeks after his accident, they must have fallen very short, even with Jamie's extra money. He didn't like the idea. But there was nothing he seemed to be able to do or find out about it. And why should Bill care about him if he did, if it was him? He didn't like the thought of being even more indebted to his own gaffer, who, as much as he respected and liked him, was still his boss. No, it made Harry feel extremely uncomfortable indeed. Mr. Craven had not restarted full lessons with him, but actually his offer had turned into a small class, as Jamie had begged to join and could even pay the man a little each week. Jamie was smart as they came, but had received only minimal teaching, especially interrupted as it had been by his journey from Ireland to England and his dad getting settled and work-wise. Jamie's own mum had then died in a cholera epidemic when they had lived in London, working for Powell and Son, a glassmakers who made much stained glass for church windows and fancy glass. His dad had then moved to Stourbridge after the cholera took his wife. The move, too, had proved a success, but then Dad himself had died during a fluish fever a couple of years later, leaving the very young and newly Sterling's apprenticed Jamie alone. Just hard luck, as Jamie called it. But I could sorely do with some more book learning. My reading isn't so good, to be honest, and I heard a man say once that if you can read, it opens up the whole world to you. Now, that's a prospect, isn't it? Harry liked that idea too, and then had the idea. Mum and Jane read very well. They can help you too. Do you think they would? Well, of course. They'll have a whole heap of jobs you could do in return, I'm sure. It proved to be so, and books from the Stourbridge Lending Library began to arrive home via a subscription they clubbed together for. Yet a more unexpected taker of Mr. Craven's lessons came in the form of Abby. "I'd like to talk better and reckon better. I'd like to work in the showrooms at Sterling's, but I know they wouldn't take me unless I was more genteel sounding." Mum was astounded. She had pointed this very thing out to Abby many times, that with her pretty looks, they would take her on in a flash if she could talk and reckon well, but Abby had point blank ignored her. She and Jane now looked at each other meaningfully, and Abby saw. "Yes, Mum, I know you've been saying for ages, but now I see sense on it, seeing as I'm going to be working soon. Harry asked me long back what I'd like doing for a job, and it got me thinking I'd like the showroom with their pretty uniforms or dresses sometimes, but I know I'm not good enough as it is." "Stop looking at me like a fish, Harry. I'm loud my thoughts, like you said, my opinions, as Mr. Craven puts it." Of course, Harry. "Of course, Abby," he got out, and bit by bit, onto his thumb. "Of course, Abby," he got out, and bit by accident onto his thumb under the biscuit he was holding in mid-air during his speech. He was surprised, he had to admit. Mum must have told her 1,000 times to no effect. "I think it's a grand idea," said Jamie in his best English.
"Oh, do you?"
Abby simpered, Jamie's approbation being her final seal of approval as far as she was concerned. Jane watched on narrowly. Mum quietly gave her approval for the lessons, putting her cup down and patting the girl's leg. "Well, I've always said it was a good idea, Abby. I am glad you've seen the sense in it at last." Indeed, privately, Mum made a request to Mr. Craven himself. Would it be all right if she could go to his trade union classes on a Thursday evening? Her early night, and the one for advanced mathematics. Seeing as all the youngsters were taking an interest in bettering themselves, she would dearly like to come along if she were good enough. As jobs came up in Stirling's, much better paid jobs in wages and accounts that she wasn't quite good enough for. Her own mum had shown her enough reckoning for running a farm or a small business, but things could get quite complicated using formulas and the like at Stirling's. She needed to stop doing lining. "It's making my head ache," and the headaches were getting worse. Her eyesight was going. It scared her. She'd already cut down her hours. She wouldn't be able to continue for much longer the way she was. What would happen then? The thoughtful Mr. Craven looked at her. "Well, you seem to need some eyeglasses, Mrs. Gaskell. The very same thing happened to me because I was reading so much. Yes, so much indeed that I had headaches and my eyesight began to deteriorate. That is the real answer for you, I believe. I only use mine for reading, as you must have seen. I am most fine for every day without them." "It would depend on how much I could get a pair for. We've had a lot of expense lately, what with Harry's accident and so on. But if things continue fair from now on, it could be possible, perhaps. We have Jamie's lodging money, and from the summer Abby will be working, which will help again. I don't know yet. It may be possible. We do still have some money left. It depends how much there would be." He listened attentively and offered her his glasses to try, hoping against hope that they would help her. "Please God," he asked, His generous Christian nature would accept no other way. She tentatively took them from him, but stopped, worriedly gazing at him. "I can't. They're yours. What if I break them? What would I do? What would you do? I could never live with myself." "No, don't worry. I have a spare pair. I want you to just try them. As if they work for you, I will know what you would take, the same lenses as myself. I then would be able to look for a pair for you, knowing I would not make a mistake. Here, let me help you." And he most gentlemanlike placed them around her ears. "Just get them in front of your eyes now. That's it. Tell me, do they help?" "Oh, no, everything's strange, not a proper picture. Oh, I don't like it," she gasped out and went to take them off straight away. "No, wait, close your eyes. I forgot. It's my fault. I should have said. Reminded you, they're my glasses for reading, not looking at the world. They make everything look blurry for me too, if I try to look up. No." And from his bag he fumbled out a book, opening it on the first page. "Try this." She read, "David Copperfield by Charles Dickens." She turned the page. "Today is the first day of the story of my life. Chapter 1. I am born." Oh! She'd made a fast intake of air and looked up excitedly, but then, seeing the blurred vision return, she flustered and put a hand in front of her eyes, looking down again quickly. It's wonderful! So clear, and my head feels somewhat better just for it. How?" She struggled. How marvellous! I must get some, but I'm not sure how." She took the spectacles off and gave them to him, carrying on, "I would be able to work more again, do more for Mr. Darby for a while to pay. I must talk with Jane, tell her, and Harry about my headaches. I have kept this to myself till now, not wanting to worry them. I have only told you, the only person I thought you would understand somehow. We must decide what to do. Well, it seems I must get some." She went thoughtful again, into herself quietly. Mr. Craven had not forgotten her request at the outset. "As for my advanced mathematics classes, if you are still interested, you need to be a member of one of the trade unions that paid for the classes. I know the Glassmakers has a friendly society, which is a form of union. They would probably let you join, as you have always worked in the glass industry. Harry should join the Glassmakers Society too, a different organisation, and then he will get professional certificates to show his skill, especially useful if he changes job. And they will get your subscription that will give them extra funds to pay to enable you to do the classes. I usually teach men, but there is no rule that says it can only be men. In fact, as the mechanics, glassmakers and engineering unions, already pay their steady amount, you joining would not cost them anything. Why would they complain? And then in votes where you wouldn't be involved, so for example conditions in the cone, you could perhaps abstain or just not be there for any votes. Yet for things that concern the liners or wherever you do work, it would be the choice of the committee to say it at the last. I don't know what they would say. Mum, who had worked all her life in the glass trades, was even cross about the fact that women were hardly ever let into the cone. The reason was that they nearly always fainted. Their close-fitting stays and other clothes were probably the reason. "Well, take off the stays," she privately thought. She knew Jane did when there was no one around and she had a lot of washing to do. It just seemed sense. But then, there wasn't a lot of that all round in the world, was there? She knew Jamie had told them about the famine in Ireland that seemed due to get worse even this year. Yet there was corn coming out that could save so many people. It disgusted her. She didn't believe it was the Catholics' fault, as some people said. Why, the blight had started out in Belgium or somewhere. It was just like when flus that killed many people came round. It wasn't their fault. She could not believe that God would do that. But why did he let it happen? The cholera, the influenzas, famines. It was all supposed to be so good. All this industry growing, but at the same time all these terrible things. And the workhouses. She could not believe that God looked down and liked it all. And as a woman, not supposedly being allowed to think about all this, when she had worked and worked like a man, supported her family, loving them all, and Jane. Well, we should ask them. I am a liner after all. My husband was a stoker all his life, his father a gaffer, and the children are going to work in the trade. Harry will hopefully be a gaffer one day, and well, Abby will soon be in the trade too, and she's keen for lessons too now. Strange girl. All this time I've been telling her to work hard and to learn to speak well. And now, just at the last, she decides to put a spurt on. Oh, many do in their last year, Mrs. Gaskell, not just Abby. It's the thought of the real world out there, and they realise that going to school is not so bad after all, perhaps. Well, your school, Mr. Craven. Oh, there's many schools that are horrible, terrible. I find out now that Poppy's having a dreadful time at the village school. That teacher's a tartar. It makes me so sad for her. I've asked her if she wants to come back, but she does like the farm so much. And she's like my grandfather, country handsome, even in looks, built more for work than Abby is, who's all slender and grace. Poppy looks like she'll go on having many sons and daughters and milk the cows at the same time. She laughed. Mr. Craven was a little embarrassed by her comment, but couldn't help a small smile. Mum was very open with him in a way she hardly ever was with anyone else, except Jane. And you and Thomas are coming to dinner, from now on, aren't you? It'll do them good to practice their manners every day, as well as have lessons. Oh, please, don't behave any differently on our account. I don't want you to be any other way than you usually would be. Oh, no. They should all learn a little more how to behave in the world, respectable, polite, especially now they are making an effort to better themselves, she said proudly. Mum always used her best English with Mr. Craven, even if she did make jokes about her niece giving birth. She must remember not to do it again, she thought. She had seen his embarrassment and realised that polite people obviously didn't do that. It wasn't so long ago some of the rules of respectability she'd known, but she'd forgotten herself. Oh well, she thought with a slight cringe. We'll have lots of practice from now on.